So I'm really excited to be here. It's just been an incredible experience. This is my first time here, so thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with so many of you. I already see many familiar faces and conversations. I wanted to first touch a little bit, obviously not only about my story, my journey, but of course I have to talk about the Miss America organization because of the seat that I sit in. And a lot of times I think there's a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions about who Miss America is or who she should be. And I will always say that everyone wants to win Miss America. Not everyone wants the job of Miss America. And those are two very separate things. And so the organization itself is actually focused around 4 pillars. And the first, and I think most important, is service. And so every contestant in the organization is actually required to have a personal platform, a cause that they choose to champion for our year of service. And so mine was celebrating diversity through cultural competency, and I'll get into that a little later. But through my entire year traveling, I think I was probably, in and out of schools, really advocating and speaking about causes that I was really passionate about, which was a wonderful resource to be able to share my message. The second is scholarship, and I mentioned last night that I did start competing for scholarship money and was fortunate enough to walk away with, through my time competing, $92,000 in scholarship money and graduated debt-free, and do have a little bit left to put towards my graduate degree, which has been great. The third pillar is style, and the fourth is success. So that's just a little bit about kind of the organization itself and really what we try to do to empower young women. My story was obviously very different, and my journey was very different, and I remember feeling like I could never be in this role and have the title of Miss America because I wasn't the stereotype. And it turns out being brown is another different stereotype, and adding Miss America to that, and a woman, and a person of color, there were quite a few things that I walked into that I had no idea was coming my way, I suppose. Growing up, I was actually born in Syracuse, New York, but my grandparents raised me in the small town of Vijayawada for 3 years. So my first spoken language was actually Telugu. And when I came back here, my family lived in Oklahoma at the time. And I think the first time I realized that I was different was when I was in 3rd grade. We lived in a very small, predominantly white, conservative town in the rural South. And there was a young boy who said, "Nina, are you a Christian?" And I said, "Well, no, but I do believe in God, and we, our faith, you practice our faith in my family, and I'm a Hindu." And he said, "Well, if you're not a Christian and you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell." And I remember going home that day feeling so misunderstood and telling my mother what had happened. And she said to me, this was 16, 17 years ago maybe, if I did my math right. And she said to me, sometimes, Nina, it's best to really not talk about our religion or our beliefs or where we come from because people don't necessarily understand that. I can understand maybe why she would say that at that time, but the reality of the situation is those conversations are still happening with our youth, with our children, and this idea of that you can't be who you are because of your race, your religion, your sexual orientation is something that was where the idea of cultural competency really started. And so when my family moved to Michigan, very similar stereotypes continued to follow me along the way, something that we've all experienced in this room. If I was going to have an arranged marriage, if I worship cows, what does the red dot mean? Your house smells like curry. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so many of these remarks weren't necessarily meant to be malicious, but really simply due to the fact of ignorance. And so when I went to college, I was constantly correcting stereotypes my entire life. And the first thing that I feel like college was a wonderful experience and opened a lot of doors and introduced me to what we lovingly call Brown Town, when you are thrown into a society of meeting other Indian Americans, which I had had very little interaction before growing up. I was one of the only Indian girls in my classes for many years. And so when I went to college, University of Michigan, one of the things that I really noticed is that I was a part of the Indian Student Association, the Hindu Foundation. We had all these groups. I was in Greek life and, different groups and organizations on campus, which were all doing great things, but none of us worked together. And so one of the initiatives that all of the student leaders on campus founded was this idea of doing a diversity day at a local elementary school in Ann Arbor. And each classroom was a different country, and children rotated between those classrooms and learned something specific to that country, whether it's a talent, food, cuisine, something that they were able to have a hands-on activity that they could touch and feel and engage with, rather than just sitting in a classroom and saying, oh, this is India on a map, and learning about it. And so this was the first of many Circles of Unity, which is now the organization that I've continued to work with and advocate for, that started 7 years ago with a group of 4 individuals that were just really passionate about wanting to promote our culture and competency starting at that young age. And so since my time winning Miss America, I can't say this enough, I didn't just wake up as Miss America and say, I'm going to promote diversity now, and I'll be the poster child for it. It was something I had essentially been working for my entire life, but officially for 6 years now. And so when I won, you know, the hysteria that culminates in that 2 minutes when your life kind of changes overnight, there was also a significant amount of xenophobic comments that I faced right after I won. And I have to say, I think the silver lining was that, or what was interesting is that 30 years ago, Vanessa Williams won this title, and she was the first African-American Miss America. And a fun fact, I'll give you a little pageant trivia, I suppose, or knowledge. Vanessa was actually a former Miss Syracuse. I was a former Miss Syracuse, both Miss New Yorks, 2 historic Miss New Yorks, and went on to win Miss America 30 years to the date of when she was crowned. I was after that. And the ironic, and it might not even be ironic, but the sad thing is that Vanessa faced very similar comments when she won the title. And 30 years later, it was the same situation that was still happening in our country. And in the grand scheme of it, something as small as Miss America, people were so resistant to that change. And so my platform, I was able to bring not only awareness to it, but what I was most proud of is working with the college and university demographic, the young people that really stepped forward to champion this cause alongside me. And I think we've all been there where we've struggled with our identity of being Indian and being American or South Asian or whatever it may be, and feeling like we have to compromise or sacrifice a part of who we are. And that's the message that I wanted to convey to our youth, that you can be Indian, you can be American, and you can have the best of both worlds, and that's the way that we can really harness our best potential. So I'm looking forward to our conversations and our discussion, and again, thank you for having me.